Hey gang, I just want to kind of throw a very brief recorded lecture with you guys, uh, kind of underlining what I think are some of the most important things about ethics at this stage in our curriculum. Now, basically, my ambitions for this lecture are fairly low. I just want to cover some introductory stuff and plant some ideas that we will come back to in 664, which is our ethics course, and you guys will take that with me at this exact time next year. So hopefully, when we do come back to discuss this stuff again, some of these ideas will seem familiar and they will have had a little chance to kind of germinate over the course of the year. So I'd like to briefly address why ethics are essential to professional identity. In some ways, that seems very common sense, like it's a question that answers itself, but I'd like to kind of take a bite of some of the specifics. So, I guess I'd like to share first how I conceive of ethics. Now, you'll see that throughout the curriculum, we'll take a look at ethical codes and ethics-related legislation. But really, in a broad sense, I think of ethics as being a system that helps us facilitate risk management. It helps us steer clinical outcomes towards those outcomes that have the greatest acceptable level of risk, which means the smallest level of risk. Like I say, we'll eventually take a look at codes and legislation, but more broadly, ethics is really something that's values oriented. It involves our own values. It's process based. We don't come up to an ethical decision and make it like that. It involves a process of reflection, and that reflection includes self-awareness focused on, again, our values, our beliefs. It's a developmental process, so hopefully I'm going to be better at ethical decisions tomorrow than I am at today. And the whole system is anchored to empirically grounded standards. And what I mean by that is the system is guided by contributing to the best clinical outcomes that are available as defined by empirical research. So ethics are essential to a professional identity at the individual level and then at the professional level. What is a profession? Well, a profession is just an occupation or a job that has been recognized by the broader community as important enough that it should only be provided by people who are established providers of the service. So counseling should only be provided by counselors. And it's not counselors who decided this, it's the broader society, right? So therefore we have a special sanction given to us by the broader community. The broader community has decided they want us to provide them with our service, and they don't want anyone else to provide them with our service. Professions involve a developmental course of emergence. So as a profession, we're going to be stronger tomorrow than we are today. And because of our role, we have greater autonomy than many professions. There are many important professions that don't have as much autonomy. I guess I should clarify that a little bit. I mean at the individual level, but then also at the professional level. We generally provide our own oversight. the counseling profession and the rehabilitation counseling profession are overseen by the counseling profession and the rehabilitation counseling profession. So we're not generally kind of watched by some other authoritative body. We are our own authoritative body. I basically said this stuff, so I'm going to keep on cruising here. Well, how do ethics play into this? Well, ethics guides our decisions, guides the decisions that help us hold on to that special sanction, provides a system for helping us figure out what's right and what's wrong. And generally speaking, what's right and what's wrong is going to be determined in terms of what's clinically best for the people that we're serving. So ethics is providing that roadmap to help us make good decisions. Without that roadmap, the broader society is going to take a look at our profession and say, yeah, I don't think we necessarily want those guys providing the service, and we lose our special sanction. So ethics are essential to the existence of the profession and, of course, the professional identity. Just to reiterate here, ethics help us make the best decisions that we can in terms of clinical outcome for the people that we serve. Ethics help us decide right versus wrong actions. And if we're unable to do that, what do we have? We don't have a profession anymore, and we certainly don't have the trust of the broader community anymore. So hopefully I'm making my central point, and that is that ethics guide our decisions, and without the ability to make good decisions, we can't exist as a profession. That's really all I'm trying to say. 7 minutes talking, that's really the key point I'm making. So we'll take a look at ethics code, not today, but we'll take a look at ethics codes, legislation, and other structures that help to guide ethical behavior a little more closely next year in 664. But I do want to kind of zoom in on the idea of scope of practice legislation, and especially the scope of practice part more than the legislation part. Scope of practice, the idea of scope of practice is essentially an idea about us as professionals providing services that are just within the boundaries of what we're qualified to, of services that we're qualified to provide. And then at the same time, it's about people who are not qualified to provide the special services that we provide. It's about those folks keeping out of our kind of zone of practice. And there's legislation that defines scope of practice legislation, or that defines scope of practice. That's one of the ways that the broader society, the broader community establishes the special sanction that I've been talking about. But really the main idea about scope of practice is a clinician who provides a service that falls within the scope of practice of a given professional is required to be appropriately credentialed as a member of that profession. So basically, counselors provide counseling. Scope of practice legislation and the concept of scope of practice helps to establish a reasonable standard of care. And a reasonable standard of care is built on sound theoretical knowledge. So even though we're not focused on ethics this semester, we are focused on fortifying our theoretical knowledge. And a standard of care for us as counselors requires having that sound theoretical knowledge. So we really are contributing to ourselves as ethical providers. Scope of practice requires that we have knowledge of the people that we serve. For most of us, that's going to be folks with disabilities as rehabilitation counselors. We need to be able to provide reliable services. How do we determine if services are reliable? Well, you take time, the 2 or 3 years that you guys are taking, to become familiar with counseling literature, history of counseling, techniques and theories, such that you know largely what works and what does not work. All of this is guided by preserving the safety of the people that we serve. In order for that to occur, we need to adhere to ethical standards. I'm going to actually not talk about the appropriate documentation bullet there. So ethics and risk management. Well, ethics is a system for distinguishing between right and wrong actions. So the system of ethics includes ethical codes, includes legislation. They're kind of structures within a system that help us to make good decisions. Risk management, on the other hand, is the activity of facilitating good or bad outcomes. So when we're making ethical decisions and when we're making good ethical decisions, what we're doing is we're practicing risk management. We're looking at situations that involve choice. We got choice A, we got choice B. A lot of the time, neither choice is going to be perfect, and you have to pick the one that's going to have the best outcome. That's going to be the one that involves the lowest level of risk for the individual that you're serving and for the broader community. So ethics is a system for distinguishing right actions from wrong actions in terms of good values versus bad values. And risk management is a related activity, although technically separate, and it is the activity of selecting outcomes with the most acceptable levels of risk and avoiding intolerable levels of risk. So both of these activities, ethics being the system, risk management being the activity, are focused on client well-being, policies within our profession, legislation, professional identity, and of course, ethics. So this is important for a lot of reasons, but I think the idea that I want us to kind of leave off with here is again focusing on introduction of the term risk management to our discussion of ethics. Why are we talking about risk management? Why aren't we just talking about good choice, bad choice? Well, because what we'll see throughout our curriculum and our careers is that a lot of situations are ambiguous. There isn't a perfect decision. There is a better or best of two less than perfect decisions. And through implementing ethics, through utilizing the structures of ethics and practicing good risk management, we are making the choices that entail the most acceptable level of consequential risk to the greatest extent possible within the available options. And that acceptable level is the lowest level. And being able to do that repeatedly is central to maintaining our professional identity as individuals and then as practitioners as a field. So I hope that provided a nice introduction to some of the broader ethical concepts that we'll be discussing throughout our program. Underlines some of the concepts expressed by Corey in the current chapter, and preps us for our more depthful visit into ethics next year. You guys have a great weekend. Take care.